welcome. My name is Lexie Papaspyrou and I'm Product Director at the Tech Talent Charter. Tech Talent Charter is an industry membership group that aims to improve diversity and inclusion in the tech talent pipeline. And one of the things that we do with our signatories every year is ask our signatories to provide us with diversity data on their tech workforce. In our most recent survey, we found from that data that just 9% of UK tech employees are from low socioeconomic backgrounds. And we also found that socioeconomic diversity is the area of diversity and inclusion practice that is focused on the least by employers. So with that in mind, we are hosting this webinar today on setting up a tech task force on social mobility with the Sutton Trust. The aim of this is to try and showcase the work that is happening in other industries on how to further social mobility and to offer kind of aspirational and practical insights for tech employers on how to address socioeconomic diversity in tech. So I have a fantastic panel to speak to us today, and I'd like to start off by asking them to please introduce themselves. So can we please go to Binda, Arun and Jenny?
Great, thanks, Lexie. Hi, everyone. My name's Binda. I'm Director of Innovation at the Sutton Trust. The Sutton Trust is a charity that champions social mobility. We do lots of research, policy work, and then lots of direct programming on the ground with young people as well. And we've set up lots of initiatives over the last 26 years that really tackle social mobility and diversity within certain professions, such as the legal profession, accountancy, finance, and other industries, where we really try and bring employers together to look at some of those challenges and how we actually work collaboratively to look at some of those solutions. So it's really great that we're able to kind of work with Tech Talent Charter and others in this space to kind of think about what we do next in this industry.
Thank you, Binda. Arun.
Hey everyone, great to be here. My name is Arun. I'm a lawyer at Weiss. When I'm not doing that, I'm also on the board of Prime Commitment, which is a charity which essentially helps students pre-university get work placements at law firms. Very kind of personal matter to me as well. I kind of am from quite underprivileged backgrounds and kind of really benefited from loads of programs helping students from those kind of backgrounds break into professions. So super happy to be here, and yeah, thank you all for attending.
Thanks, Arun. And then finally, Jenny.
Thanks, Lexie. As has been said, it's a real pleasure to be here. So I'm Jenny Baskerville. I head up inclusion, diversity and equity for KPMG in the UK. We're a professional services firm. We're also a signatory to the Tech Talent Charter. Prior to heading up ID, I was head of social mobility for the firm. So I've been focused on social mobility for about a decade now at the organisation. I helped set up something called Access Accountancy, which is a cross-sector initiative within the professional services and accountancy firms, particularly focused on work experience, but more latterly focused on progression within the sector as well. And I also sit on the board of an organisation called Progress Together, which is very much focused on progression within the financial services industry of individuals from a lower socioeconomic background. So really excited for the conversation today. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So we've got a very well-credentialed panel for you. I'd love to start by asking our speakers, why does socioeconomic diversity matter and what does it mean to you, if you'd like to share individually? So Binda, let's go to you first.
Yeah, thanks, Lexie. A really great kind of question. And I guess I always start by talking about my background and the fact that I am first in my family to go to university. I'm the first to hold a professional job. And I'm the first to become kind of socially mobile in my family. And I understand the struggles that I've been through and that my family have faced. And that's really spurred me on, I guess, in terms of my career. But also recognizing how some of those challenges are so deeply entrenched within society and within education and the professional work. And that's why I work for organizations like the Sutton Trust and have worked in social mobility since the age of kind of 21. Because we all know through all of the evidence and the data and the research that the Trust and others have done, that there's such a big link between kind of income inequality and then your outcomes in life. And that starts from the moment you're born and it kind of follows you all the way through school, into higher education, into apprenticeships, but also into the world of work. And it's just one of those things that, you know, there are so many brilliant initiatives out there and so many fantastic ways that employers and education can really help to tackle some of those challenges. And there's huge amounts of great work happening. And I think it's just about how we look to those examples and really look at what's going on the ground to learn and think about how we can really tackle some of those challenges in other areas which aren't having as much progress, as you heard from the stats that you mentioned already. But 9% is probably one of the lowest stats that I think I've ever seen for socioeconomic diversity in any profession. I think I was quite shocked when I heard that number come out in the research. And so it's really kind of spurred me and others at Sutton Trust on to really think about how we work collaboratively to think about what we do about that.
Brilliant, thank you, Binda. And yeah, you're quite right. If we look at a comparative figure across law or finance, it's 29% and then 34%, I believe. So 9% is way behind even other industries where we might expect this problem to potentially be worse. So I heard about it from, I guess, the Sutton Trust point of view with your kind of explanation there, Binda. But Jenny, as an end employer that's quite mature in this social mobility focus area process, what does social mobility and socioeconomic diversity mean at KPMG, and why does it matter? Why did KPMG decide this was an important thing to look at?
Well, we've been, thank you, KPMG has had a vested interest and I suppose been doing a lot of work on the topic of social mobility, and it very much started actually focused on policy issues like the real living wage, which we continue to support today. And then we had quite an extensive education outreach offering, which also continues through our corporate responsibility programs. What we began to notice over the years, though, was that we didn't really have a focus on socioeconomic diversity through our data capture or indeed in our inclusion diversity agenda. So that was very much something that we wanted to implement. And it was only through starting to capture that data that we really started to see that there was both an underrepresentation within the organisation, but also quite a marked difference in colleagues' experience within the organisation, depending on where they came from. And frankly, that just feels completely unjust. We've published some progression research, which I'm sure I'll talk to a bit more on today's session, but frankly showing that socioeconomic background is the biggest career barrier within the organisation, and that's not dissimilar to data sets that comes out from other industries. So there's a lot to do. On a personal level, I actually come from a more privileged background, but my mum worked in social inclusion and worked with reintegrating excluded pupils into the education system. And I suppose from a young age, I saw a complete disparity between some of those experiences of young people. And I guess her sort of common purpose and desire to support people's kind of stuck with me, hence me focusing on social mobility from a justice point of view for a long time. But KPMG, we've got the data, we can see that that's something we need to work towards, and we feel a sort of moral responsibility as a large business to also make sure others are coming on that journey with us too.
That's brilliant. It's one of the reasons why we like taking collective action at Tech Talent Charter, is that businesses can learn from each other. And I just want to draw on two things that you've highlighted there, Jenny. The first one is that point that you made, that socioeconomic background was the biggest barrier to employee engagement and progression. That is something that I think we all need to be taking away from this call, that we think about all the different diversity lenses we might be using. Socioeconomic background, again, it was found at KPMG to be the biggest barrier. And I think that's something we really have to take away and reflect on. The second thing that I'd love to point out is something that we often get asked at Tech Talent Charter is, can I focus on this area if I'm not from a low socioeconomic background? And I think that's it's really great to have you on this call, Jenny, because this is not down to folks who potentially come from a certain background to simply be fixing this issue. It's incumbent on all of us as business leaders and decision makers to do so. So thank you for sharing that, Jenny. And then let's come to you, Arun.
Yeah, so kind of similar to Binda, I had traditionally underprivileged background. So I grew up on top of a flat, on top of a chip shop, which my parents ran in Birmingham. Had like no idea really about what was out there in terms of careers. I'm a corporate lawyer now, which honestly, just a few years ago, I didn't know existed. I didn't know what it was about. And I think there are kind of two aspects here. There's one is the moral case, and I guess the second is the business case. And the moral one is like me kind of growing up thinking, you're going to university. I went to a great university at LSE, but I was surrounded by people who, had work experience, who had unlimited A stars and all these sorts of things. And I was like, but how's this fair? Why do I have to work kind of 10 times harder to get to the same spot? But actually kind of going into the business case, now that I'm in the profession, I actually think there are multiple advantages from coming from that different background. I think it really does result in a more creative and a productive workforce. I mean, when you're in a team doing something, achieving a goal, building a business or whatever it might be, you don't want a group of people who just think the same way and went through the same schooling and had the same experience. So I've kind of embraced, like, I remember going through university and kind of pretending I wasn't from that background and trying to like blend in, but actually now that I'm here, it's much more on the flip side. It's like, actually, I'm going to embrace that. I remember working in a chip shop and learning about hard work and resilience, but also dealing with clients, dealing with customers. You know, it's all kind of parallels, which, you know, you don't necessarily think of, but actually the business case is crystal clear for me. And if I was hiring, I would make sure I, you know, wanted people from the whole spectrum, because the talent is absolutely out there.
Fantastic. It's so important to have advocates that are willing to be public about their story. And of course, not everyone does want to, and that is entirely their choice. And I think that's one of the things that many folks on this call may have questions about, is how do we make sure that we are displaying the authentic voices within our business without outing people in ways they don't feel comfortable with. So some really interesting points there that you've alluded to in your experience, Arun. So I'd love for us to kind of get a bit more then into the idea of taking action together as an industry, because this webinar is of course about setting up a tech task force on social mobility. So I would love to come to Jenny on this, and back to Arun as well. What are the benefits of employers within an industry coming together to work on social mobility? So for employers that are on this call, why shouldn't they just say, oh, we'll just work on this by ourselves, because then we have autonomy to do whatever we feel is right for us to improve this area? What's the benefit of doing it collectively through something like a task force or the programs that you've been part of setting up and participating in?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that the challenge is of such a scale that it requires all of us to be pointing in the same direction. And that doesn't mean that we all need to be doing exactly the same thing, but there is a lot to learn from various different organisations thinking and working together to address a similar challenge. So certainly in the accountancy profession, we were quite quick to follow on actually from Prime and the legal sector in recognising that as a profession we were particularly bad for socio-economic background, and particularly for colleagues from a lower socio-economic background, I should say, and the experience was clearly quite different. And so what we focused specifically on was work experience and access to the profession. But as I said, that's really pivoted in the last few years around progression. But the benefit of coming together has been we've submitted data together, for example, and then we've been able to benchmark. You know, it's a newer area, as you've already said, Lexie, so there isn't huge amounts of data out there, but having the ability to be able to see how you compare to your peers and have a sort of more robust benchmark in which you can mark yourselves and know where you need to do better is firstly so helpful. Secondly, to just share that best practice and say, oh, we tried this, because some people might be further ahead on the journey than others. This is what we've learned along the way. And, you know, that's good or bad things. You know, I often am talking about the things we might have got wrong as well as the things we think we're getting right. And then the last thing I'd say is that responsibility that we feel as a large business. There are many organisations, for example, in the accountancy profession, I'm sure similarly in the tech industry, where they're going to be different sized organisations. Not everyone will have a head of IDE or a team dedicated to do some of this work. There's a responsibility to share that best practice across all sized organisations within the sector. And I think that's something that both Access Accountancy and Progress Together are really leading on, is trying to have a voice within the sector to bring more people on that journey, share the research, share the insight so that everyone can benefit as well.
That's really interesting. So there's this element of getting good data and being able to understand what is the problem that we are trying to solve, what direction do we need to point in to solve that problem together. But also there's this wider piece of, are we, you know, is a rising tide really lifting all boats, and how are we influencing change as leaders in a wider business context as well, which is so important, because one of the things that we found from our report is that 50%, half of all companies are not doing anything on social mobility.
Yeah.
One more time, half of all companies are doing nothing on social mobility. So there is a big battle here for us to fight in terms of raising this as a priority. Arun, I'd love to hear from you participating in the legal program that Sutton Trust runs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Prime Commitment is a great example of how players in an industry can come together to make meaningful change. I think, you know, what we essentially do is go out to law firms and work with them to set up a work experience program for pre-university students. And, you know, arguably there's nothing stopping those law firms from just doing that themselves, right? Like, why associate themselves with Prime? But actually, as with most issues that we face in society, I actually think it's when everyone is shouting about it together that it really, really starts to set alight and get traction. And it might be a really weird analogy, but it's kind of just sprung to my mind. But I can't sing for the life of me. But if I'm at a football match and everyone is singing the national anthem together, all of a sudden it sounds beautiful, it's super loud, and it has that sort of power behind it. And it's kind of the same sort of thing. I think doing something alone, it will have impact, of course, and you might help a select few bunch of people, but you really struggle to kind of scale that and have the ripple effects through the industry. Like Prime, it's like all the law firms that are familiar with it. As a result of that, clients know about it, and all of a sudden you cover off way more people who know about the social mobility issue within the legal sector as a result of being associated with Prime. It's much more difficult to do that kind of individually. And kind of to Jenny's point as well, you need some kind of benchmark, I guess, and something to kind of compare against. So how well am I doing, right? There is, a surprising amount of people, and, if you go to senior peoples within industry, they would love to make a change and they would love to kind of contribute, but actually they don't know how to do that. So having an organization which can kind of guide you through that and kind of say, oh, this is what this firm are doing, that's what this firm are doing, have you thought about this? It's only going to kind of help. So I think that kind of summarizes the kind of position. I think it's kind of a no-brainer to do it together. And, I think it's a nice feeling to do it together as well. It's a bit of a softer point.
Definitely, it can be a very, we know that D&I headcounts across the board have become very squeezed, and desks have become very busy, and then it's very hard to have that kind of group support to enact some of these programs of change. So actually having that collective environment can be really beneficial. And I'm also hearing, and I think this probably reflects a lot of people on this call, there might be some employers on this call who are at the very beginning of their journey and they are passionate to find out more, but might be going, oh God, we're not mature in our D&I journey in social mobility. And we probably have others that are real thought leaders in this area that are at the coalface of progressing what this practice area looks like. And the question is this type of collective action relevant for both? And I'm hearing in what you're saying, Aaron, that the answer there is yes, because we can influence change and have that raised voices together kind of approach for everyone. And that it doesn't matter whether you are just starting out or whether you're more mature in this process, that is still a really powerful thing to be doing together. So I would love to now come on to a question about data. Data is something that I often get asked about when it comes to social mobility, and we know that there are this huge range of challenges that people face when it comes to access and progressing in tech. So please can I ask you to reflect on how data collection can help us better understand and address the challenge with social mobility in tech? Binda, would you like to start with this one?
Yeah, happy to. Data is my friend. Honestly, everything we do at the Sutton Trust stems from our evidence and our research, and hopefully those on the call will have heard and read and seen some of our research out there in the media and kind of picked up on things. But everything that we do is really rooted in the data, because the data has the key. It holds the key to lots of the challenges and the kind of areas of interest for us, and particularly focusing on things like access and progression. Like Jenny made the point, like without that data, you're just not going to know where the problems are in your business, not just within your business, but also across your sector as well. The data will allow you to forensically pinpoint kind of where the problems are, where there are challenges, and how you can then divert your focus to then address those challenges specifically to where those problems might be in your organization. And it could be that access might not be a challenge for your business, and that's fine, because you're getting really great traction with lots of diverse candidates, and you're getting them into your business. But actually the data might show that they're not staying, and why aren't they staying, and how are you going to think about how you make all of that support around retention and progression better. But you might find that you're a business where actually the data is showing the problem is actually with access. So it really allows you to do that forensic analysis around where the challenges might be for you as a business, but also like with access accountancy and other initiatives, like where do you fit within the ecosystem? How does your organization benchmark against others? So I'm 100% an advocate for collecting data, and I've seen the power of data in both things like Prime and access accountancy, Progress Together, and other initiatives, where I think that the progress has been so much faster because we have collected that data. I think that there's other industries out there where they haven't necessarily started on that data journey, and you can really see that there is a lot of activity happening, but maybe not activity all pulling in the same direction. And actually that's not kind of resulting in change that you'd like to see. Whereas where you've got that data underpinning that work and everyone kind of moving in the same direction, I think it really is showing that progress is happening and change is happening. So I'm 100% saying that data is the key. If you can invest in data, then that is, you know, and with submitting data, things like Tech Talent Charter, you're getting access to that, and you're really seeing, I think, where some of those challenges are. So yeah, that would be my take on it.
Thank you, Binda. And I always talk about data all the time, but it's nice to have someone else saying, like, yes, data is the key point from which to start. An interesting thing we found in our report is that a number of organisations are focusing on action on social mobility, but aren't measuring. And I thought that was really interesting. It was quite similar, the number that were measuring and not taking action, and the number that were taking action and not measuring. They're actually quite comparable figures, which is quite an interesting turnout for what we found from our data. So I'd love to come across to Jenny now, because we've kind of talked a little bit from Binda about the importance of the data, but there are going to be a lot of people sitting going, well, how do I go about actually doing that? What are the practical steps I need to take? And especially for organisations that are maybe starting this out. And I know you spoke earlier, Jenny, about your journey to realising you needed to collect this data, and then what surprises that threw up. So could you just give some practical advice on how do you go about collecting data on this issue area?
Yeah, happily. And look, we've been on a journey ourselves, and we've not always got it right. We've been capturing parental occupation data. So I guess the sort of known measure validated by experts is the sort of the most robust indicator when assessing socioeconomic background since 2016. And we publish a lot of that data on our impact site. And also we've published pieces of research, like I referenced our Mind the Gap progression research earlier. I'll share that round as well. But actually, you know, colleagues have been at some points reticent to share data. So it's not easy, because it, you know, certainly in the earlier days, it wasn't a common question you were asked. So there was a lot of communication support we had to provide. So we often did like an FAQ document that sat alongside it. It helped, back to Arun's point, giving some of the macro context so people understood the broader picture within which this was kind of positioned, to understand why it might be relevant that you're being asked what perhaps could feel invasive as a question. But then the benefits that we've really seen is that we've attached it to sort of our HR profile. So whilst the data is all anonymous, and of course prefer not to say, you don't have, it's voluntary at the end of the day, we now have sort of 75% plus of our colleagues sharing this data. And because it's attached to the HR profile, we're able to do lots of kind of aggregate analysis. So we can look at pay, we can look at pace of progression. So the progression report that we published looked at how long it took you to get from A to B. We could overlay it with other ID characteristics, and that's where we saw the strength of intersectionality, because it's not just socioeconomic background, it's when you're lower SEB and you're a female, for example, and or you might be of Black heritage, that is impacting your kind of pace of progression within the organisation. So I think it's been able to give us kind of multiple ways in which we looked at the quant data. And then I always say it's through our social mobility network and other people that we then overlay the qualitative insights. So holding focus groups to really then stress test some of the data you're seeing to understand what are the challenges they might be facing within the organisation, so that then you can design your strategies as a result. But it's really helped us understand which parts of the business are struggling from a socioeconomic diversity point of view. Why might that be? Or areas that are actually really socioeconomically diverse. And the most surprising thing for us at KPMG was our most socioeconomically diverse grade was our partnership, so the most senior part of the organisation, which was quite a surprise. Our challenge is in the sort of hourglass figure, the middle management. So it is, what are the barriers to that progression, that really helps us pinpoint our strategies as a result.
That's absolutely fascinating. And, you know, you've highlighted a few things there, that if people are starting out on this process as well, there is one key question, as you rightly pointed out, Jenny, that is the kind of the cornerstone of measuring socioeconomic diversity. And all of this is available really easily online with all sorts of matrices that can help you analyze that information later. But also things like focus groups. These are things that do not require you to do necessarily a huge project around, particularly if you're a small employer potentially as well. There are ways that these can be scaled up and down to be appropriate to the scale and the resources within a business. So thank you for sharing some of those insights. I'd love to come to you, Arun, now, if that's okay, to talk about something that you mentioned a bit earlier, which was to do with school engagement programs and work experience programs. And we often hear social mobility organisations will often speak to this particular area of providing work experience and needing to create those early bridges between education and work. And they're obviously hugely important. So would love to hear you kind of talk a little bit more about what those programs can achieve. And I'd also really love you to share, if you don't mind, how you think about the business case for doing a school program when it doesn't necessarily automatically translate into, you know, a better looking pie chart when you look at your hiring, for example. How do we connect up the business benefit of working with schools to then running this type of work experience or school program?
And I love speaking about this because I actually did a prime work experience program a few years ago and kind of now on board on the other side. So it's kind of great to look back. But kind of on your point, there are a bunch of schemes which help university students break in because it's, you know, second year of university, that's when you start applying for grad jobs and all that sort of stuff. But reality is, you know, at that point, it can be too late. And not too late necessarily, you know, you're not going to get anywhere, you're not going to get a job, but you're massively behind the competition. And, you know, as we all know, like getting a job in, you know, this market is really, really tough. So you kind of have to look back a few years and incept much earlier, essentially. And when you're at school, and, you know, especially if you're from a school that is, you know, a private school or a great school, which has a great infrastructure with helping with careers and stuff, you have no idea what's out there, like literally absolutely no idea. And then you have even less idea of how to get there. And so there are practical things of how that can help. So when I did my work experience program, it was at a law firm in Canary Wharf. It was my first time really being in London. I remember coming up the escalators in Canary Wharf, and I, you know, at the end of the day, I thought I was going to have a brace on my neck because I was just so wowed by, you know, the massive towers. And then, you know, you're in the building, and, you know, these people that you've been looking at online seem like celebrities, but you realize actually they're just normal people who are like quite nice. And you can, you know, all of a sudden something which seems so alien and so different, it's like, wow, I can actually do this. You know, it's not impossible at all. So there's like the actual practical stuff of, I need to do these A-levels, I need to do these extracurriculars, I need to start thinking about this, I need to be reading more about this. You know, you get those tips on what I need to do. So when it does come to second year uni, you're in a good place, or in, you know, a much better place compared to someone who's just starting from fresh. But honestly, I think the bigger thing is, I don't want to even think about how many students just count themselves out because they think there's no chance I can make it. There's no reality. I can't see someone like me making it in the industry that I'm looking at. So kind of instilling that bit of belief in someone, it can make worlds of difference. And that sort of works two ways, kind of moving into the business case. One, I actually think it can create a great pipeline of talent, you know, directly or indirectly. So I actually, with that law firm, went through their program at university and kept in touch with them for a long time. So you can actually, and they do actually actively recruit from that group. But actually, I think, so at my old firm, I recently just moved, we just signed Prime up to that scheme. And one of the points I was saying to the partners was, it's really special to have that group of people in and amongst your workforce. Just like a group of young, ambitious people who don't really know what they're doing, but they want to be there, they're enthusiastic. It's going to help the people around you just be slightly more aware when they are recruiting, because like unconscious bias is like a fact, right? People who sound a certain way or look a certain way or have certain schools on their CV, Oxford, Cambridge, all that sort of stuff, you're going to kind of have a bias towards them. But when you see the reality, you know, we've spoken a lot about data, but there's something to be said for actually seeing the students who are applying and, you know, what they're about and a bit more about them beyond just a half an hour interview. I think that can have a great effect on how you view hiring and how, you know, that pie chart will, you know, it might not be directly from that work experience program that you bring people through, but as a result of actually knowing this is what we're looking for now, it's different than what we thought about before, as a result of being, you know, directly involved and asking them, you know, what are they thinking about, you know, what are the hurdles they're facing, what can they bring to the table, and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I'm super passionate about it. I really think it's important to get in at that school stage to make meaningful impact long term, because I think it's a bit, you lose a lot of talent by the time people who haven't made it to uni, haven't bothered applying, haven't applied for the, you know, quote unquote right degrees and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, the business case is again like really, really clear.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I can hear how passionate you are about these programs, and it's something that we obviously want to see the tech industry embrace as well, because what the tech industry's tasked force on this will look like is going to be really unique to the challenges in the tech workforce, which are in and of themselves, very unique as well. And so part of this task force is about establishing this founding group, similar to how Jenny was part of the founding group in the accountancy piece, finding this founding group to work out what does this program need to look like so that it can speak to the tech talent needs, because obviously what we have there is something that's really interesting in a different way than law in some ways, because we're talking about things like data poverty, we're talking about things like who has access to a device. There are all of these other elements to this wider tech question. And there's some really fascinating research out there that shows that, things like, girls get switched off tech from the age of 11. So what happens if you're a girl and you're from a poor background? Like, how does that low socioeconomic background then impact those other intersectional lenses? So really, really interesting to kind of hear a little bit about how that potentially affects the culture of an organization by having one of these programs, and how that then can cascade through to talent. So I would love to now ask about the issue of progression in tech, but in your employer organizations. We often think about diversity and inclusion as being something that only happens when we talk about recruitment. But we know that it is a lot more than that. And actually, Jenny, you've alluded to this a little bit already. So I would love to bring this question to you. When we think about social mobility, how do we make sure that we are not just looking at this from the point of view of getting talent in the door and then that's it?
Yeah, I think it's a really important conversation. And look, I think all the work that has been done through sort of organisations like the Sutton Trust, through these kind of sector bodies looking at access, has been really important. But we've all gone on a journey, I'd say, to recognise that now that that's becoming more successful and people are starting to see that kind of diversity through the pipeline take hold, actually the focus has quite rightly moved on to how do you retain, support and progress talent, because colleagues from a lower socioeconomic background will have different needs. Like, any ID demographic, there's going to be different experiences within an organisation. The data that I referenced and I've shared in the chat did find that your socioeconomic background was the sort of the characteristic, so to speak, that had the biggest effect. And so conversely, if you were from a higher socioeconomic background, that was also a common trait in the sort of fastest progressing. And as I mentioned, there was a really strong intersectionality with gender and ethnicity as well. Less so, we didn't see so much from a sexual orientation or disability point of view. So we know that it's having an impact on colleagues' experiences within an organisation. And at KPMG, some of the things that came out through our focus groups was access to work. So how you allocate work in an organisation like KPMG does really determine, I guess, what projects you get put on, and then some of those perhaps being career enhancing versus others that might not be, and therefore the play of affinity bias coming out and how you can break some of that down. Like, technology has a role to play in my view here, because you can introduce different systems and processes that hopefully start to de-bias some of those kind of personal relationships, but it's all got to be successfully and intentionally thought through from the outset to make that really work and really hold. And you've got to kind of do a lot of that behavioural change alongside it. Other things that came through was just the lack of confidence to kind of navigate and network in an organisation of a size like KPMG, imposter syndrome coming up, all these different things that can impact on someone's ability to either put themselves forward or kind of get onto those projects that support their progression. So trying to unpack all of those themes through kind of focus groups, as I said before, are really important, because then we can start to strategize, okay, how do we actually intervene and what can we do? Just one last thing I'd say is that we have actually also started to support colleagues as they go through their kind of progression points. So if they're up for promotion and they're in a long list, we provide some additional support if they identify as from a non-professional background. This again references the intersectionality point. Previously, it was open to all historically underrepresented groups, but we pivoted it to anyone that identified from a non-professional, so intermediate or lower SEB. And therefore they intersect with other ID characteristics, of course, but it's purely for that cohort, because our progression research showed that we were missing people from that manager to senior manager kind of level. So we really wanted to make sure we were supporting as best we could people go through that transition. Now, there's work to get people onto the long list, absolutely, and that's also part of our wider strategy, but just hopefully gives you one example of where you can have that intentional intervention, hopefully to support progression within that middle management group.
Brilliant, thank you, Jenny. And I know you've mentioned intersectionality a few times there. Tech Talent Charter actually analysed this in our data and found that employers who look at socio-economic diversity in their D&I strategies have 6% higher ethnic diversity in their tech workforces. So there is actually some interesting data that we've got collectively around that, as well as the links to the various resources that Binda and Jenny have popped in the chat. So I would love to go with the really big question now, folks, which is, I would love to hear from all of you about what the most successful strategies are for promoting social mobility. So if someone needs to come away from this call with like the headline things that they should be thinking about doing, I would love if you can just give us what is that list of bullet points that they need to go away and Google or find out more about. So can we go to Binda, please?
Yeah, you've given a hard question because it's like just pick one, and I've got multiple, but I'm going to try very best to kind of focus in on one. For me,
I mean, Binda, feel free to go through them. Do go through more, because we want to.
So we talked about data, 100%. Like, if you could take one thing away from this call, it is the power of data. Like, I cannot stress that already. But the second thing is around accountability. You could have the best. You could have the best strategy out there and you could have the best will in the world, but it's so important for you to also think about how leaders in your business are going to take this seriously. There are, so many reasons that we've already talked about today around why this is a problem. And it's about building the business case and really holding your leaders and people within your business to account on some of the statistics. And that's why the data piece is key. We already know through the Tech Talent Charter statistics that it's just 9% at the moment, and then there's loads of other stats around kind of progress and challenges that individuals within the profession are already facing. So if you could do one thing, well, joining the task force is definitely number one, but it is also about how you as an organization are going to go back to your organization, to your leaders, and really sell this and really put the data and the evidence in front of them to showcase just how much of a priority this needs to be. Because we've just, talked for the last 40 minutes about all of the different challenges and all of the ways in which it can work. So that, yeah, for me, it's definitely kind of joining the task force. That accountability piece is so key, and really building the business case through the data and the evidence around why this is a business need, in the same way that you monitor your sales, your marketing, all your other statistics. This should be another one of those key things that you look at. So so on the screen is kind of a little bit of a snapshot of the things that we think at the Sutton Trust, and through working with Tech Talent Charter, looking at the data, analysing all of the work that's happening, some of the key priority areas around data collection, thinking about access, thinking about young people experience. You've heard from Arun just how powerful those work placements really can be. But then also hearing from Jenny around things like the practices and the policies and the procedures once people get into your business that can really help them get up and working their way up the ladder in the organisation. So yeah.
Brilliant, thank you, Binda, and thank you also for preparing this slide for us as well, which we'll share with everyone too. So I'd love to put that question now to you, Jenny. Jenny, what are the most successful strategies that you've observed either at KPMG or further afield that can actually improve social mobility in tech?
So obviously I have to second Binda on the data. We've really benefited from having those insights, but I'd say the really powerful thing has been the development of our social mobility network. So this was not stood up by my team. We waited for a swell, and actually it was a local group that kind of originated in our Scottish offices that then went national. But the sense of community, the sense of belonging, the space they've given to colleagues of all different grades to come together to share their stories, and then us being able to role model and profile those individuals has been palpable. And I think a lot of the progress we've made on social mobility has been down to that network. And predating that network, we did have a governance group where we invited people to kind of come together from a lower socioeconomic background to be part of kind of an organising group. And gradually that's become a national network. But I think it's really important to give space for colleagues to come together, for allies as well, but actually to be able to hear and listen and take on board that kind of direct feedback of what it feels like within the organisation, for then my team and leadership to then take action and hopefully kind of level that playing field even more. So I think if there's anything you can do, just try and find, even if it's not a network, trying to find the community of people that might identify in that way and want to play their part. and form that community will be great.
That's such an interesting one, because we sometimes hear from companies at the Tech Talent Charter, oh, I don't want to set up an employee network around this area because people aren't going to want to join it. And actually what we've seen is that there are huge employee networks for socio-economic background type of kind of employee to employee types of networks. So it's really kind of bucked what other folks might be thinking might be popular.
We thought the exact same, Lexie. We sat on it for a number of years, and I'm not even exaggerating saying that we sat on it for a number of years because of the intersectional aspect. We thought already a number of these people might be accessing other groups, but we're to 1,000 members, and that was straight away kind of rapid growth. So there's definitely a place for it. And then we're quite intentional how we bring our networks together to give that sense of intersectionality. But I mean, I've been blown away with the work that they've done and the ideas that they generate. So it's been phenomenal. So it doesn't need to be a formally governed network if that's not what the stage of your organisation. But I think some way to bring together that voice and colleague experience is absolutely key.
Fantastic. And actually, again, that's something that we see a lot with ERG practice, and with really strong ERG practice, is that the ERG, the network, doesn't have to speak on behalf of the organisation. Not everything has to go through a billion layers of sign off for you to be putting together big documents that run through the entire organisation. You can do that if you would like to take a more formalised approach to it, but actually it's perfectly fine for these networks to be informal and to just be safe spaces. Binda, did you want to come in on that before we go to Arun?
Yeah, and just to echo what Jenny's mentioned about safe spaces within businesses, like the Sutton Trust is very fortunate. We get invited to the launch and the kind of opportunity to speak to lots of within organizations who have these networks and these kind of very grassroots type kind of groups that come together. And it is so powerful to be in a room full of people who, like Arun said, historically may not have felt comfortable talking about their backgrounds, but actually bringing them all together in a room and just allowing just that space to be able to share and talk about their experiences and the barriers and the challenges, but also how the business might shape that going forward, is so powerful. And I've seen it from business to business to business, just how impactful those groups are, and just creating that space within your business to be able to do that, no matter how big or small. I've seen it in tiny little organizations and in charities like the Sutton Trust, where we do this, and also in larger organizations like Jenny's mentioned, at places like KPMG. But it is such a powerful vehicle for really engaging and learning about those experiences that those individuals have.
Thank you, Binda. And then lastly, let's go to you, Arun. Most impactful strategies that people can be taking away here?
Yeah, kind of similar to what's already been said, but just don't do it alone. I mean, there's great power in kind of having a concerted effort in kind of solving, or kind of solving the issue to it as much as we can. But everyone on this call cares about the issue. That's why we're here. So just thinking pragmatically, why reinvent the wheel and kind of try and figure out everything yourself? Like there are plenty of other people, plenty of other organizations, tech charters that are going to bring people together. Because the reality is, if you're part of a business, the bandwidth is limited, right? Senior leaders and managers have not that much time. They care, sure, but they have a million things to do. So if you're part of a team that's trying to help D&I or anything like that, then you kind of want to be as focused and as efficient as possible. You almost want to go to whoever's in charge and say, here's the problem, here's our solution, this is what we're going to do, what do you think? And hopefully at that point it's a big tick. And the way in which you get there most efficiently is by doing it together. Again, kind of drawing back to what Prime does, that's the whole point. The whole point is everyone's coming together to solve the issue. So if you're in that situation where you've got that energy, it's about collectively driving it towards the same goal. And that collective power, I think, is much more forceful.
Fantastic. Thank you, Arun. It's almost like, you've rounded us naturally to the point of being able to say, great. So if anyone is interested in being part of the tech task force on social mobility, do reach out to the Sutton Trust. We will share the details of Lauren, who's on this call. If anyone does want to be part of that founding group to help us work out what this collective action in the tech industry is going to look like, now is the time to be putting up your hands and stepping up to the table.